Ja, ik zal nog even. Please take your seats, everyone. We're going to be starting again. Also at the left, I can see still people standing up. Please take your seats.
People hugging over left. Yes.
And we are talking to you. Thank you very much.
This is how it works at Windesheim. Great. Yes. I've got one question from the live stream just before our break. Can status or success be self-defined, thus be more an individual thing than a social thing?
Can it be an individual thing, status or success, and not a social thing? Well, you can try, of course, but I don't believe one bit of it. It reminds me of a song, now maybe some of the old folks know that, you had Simon and Garfunkel in the 60s and 70s of last century, and this Paul Simon was a songwriter, and he was one of these sad young men, and he has this song that goes like this. A winter's day in a deep and dark December, I am alone, gazing from my window to the streets below, on a freshly fallen silent shroud of snow. I am a rock, I am an island. And a rock feels no pain, he will say later. An island never cries. And then he talks about love, and that he doesn't care about love. He doesn't have a need for friendship. Friendship causes pain, and he wants to forget all that. It's not true, of course. This boy is desperate. He's lonely. So a defense mechanism is to say, I'm a rock, I'm an island. I'm good enough on my own, but it's not true. So it is very good if you try that, and certainly, for instance, you've had an upbringing that gave you a sense of being loved and being worthy, and then you come to another environment where nothing goes right, nobody understands you, to keep feeling like you're still a good person. That is very useful, and it can happen. But it can only happen if you have a strong basis in some reference groups that were there when you were really tiny. That's what I believe. And I'm supported by Maslow, Abraham Maslow, with his hierarchy of human needs. If children have not had love and belonging when they were little, there is nothing to be done later. I'll come back to that after 5 o'clock, but it's a very important question. Now let me talk and dive into the deep of culture, but first give you this concept of the moral circle. Here, everybody who's in this room is involved in a moral circle. You know that you're not supposed to be standing up, walking around, or doing things that distract from the shared attention that we have. And we all know these rules. You don't have to write them down. Actually, I was impressed by how quickly you all settled down when Didan said something at the beginning. So it's clear that there are unwritten rules about we can chat and have a good time, and then when he says something, we stop. In Wageningen, this would have taken longer. So that is the moral circle. And typically, implicitly, there's a we and a they. So there's all those people are present in this lecture and everybody else in the world. Or there's all people from your country and everybody else in the world. All the Twente, the Tukkers, and the Kakkers uit het Westen. And there are all these distinctions between we and they. Most of the time, we is a better group, and we are all different, and we have qualities, status, worthiness. We have duties as well. There are things that we have to do. We have prerogatives. We're a little bit better than everybody else. And we also have a social landscape that could be more hierarchical or flatter, and that has other attributes. This is the cultural part. And most of the time, we don't care. En vroeger dan was het altijd voetballen van een heel bepaald groepje tegen de soepie. You don't care about the soup, okay? The others are the soup. And of course, this tendency to know our own moral circle very well and disregard the rest, very human tendency, can turn itself against us if we have to build a larger moral circle consisting of all the life on Earth, which we urgently need to do. It used to be, when there were only a few 100,000 people in the world, that there were so many hostile elements around us that the best thing we could do is stay alive and reproduce so that the race would continue. Now, the best thing we can do is stop overusing the resources of the world because we have become so numerous. So we cannot really use a they. Everything that's in the biosphere should actually be we. Now, you could be a part of different moral circles, and this starts to look a little bit like reference group pulling at you. For instance, maybe you are part of a group of people who are worried about climate change. And you're also somebody who eats all kinds of things, including meat. This would describe me. I don't eat meat all the time, but I do. And of late, I've become really ashamed sometimes when I'm in a restaurant and ordering a cut of meat and everybody else is ordering the vegetarian option. I'm starting to feel really bad and torn between these reference groups, and maybe I'll stop eating meat. I don't know. We'll see. It could also be that I will continue prioritizing the cook. And sort of, if I like the cook, I will not offend the cook by coming up with requests. But anyway, the point here is that you can be part of more than one moral circle. And how these moral circles look and how many there could be depends strongly on your culture. If you're from a very group-oriented culture, there's going to be one overwhelming moral circle, everybody who belongs to that group. But not so in individualistic cultures. Okay, let's bring it back down to earth. Here we have a case study. It's an old one, but it really happened, of a small or medium-sized company, and there are many of them in the world. And in this case, they print textile. And the work is organized throughout the week in such a way that on Monday, very light fabrics are being printed. During the week, the colors get darker, and then on Sunday, the machines are cleaned. And you can easily see why, from a production point of view, this is a good system. Because if you have a light fabric after a dark fabric and the machines are not quite clean, you will get pollution of the colors. So it's good to start with the light ones and the dark ones. But if you are a sales manager and you have a new customer, you want to make them an offer and give them a proof of what you can do, maybe very quickly before the competition does so. And in this particular company, things got out of hand. The production manager insisted on the regular schedule throughout the week, and the marketing manager wanted to have quick orders because there's a client that could go away and we could lose a lot of money. So it had gotten so bad that they didn't speak with one another, and also their respective divisions would not sit together over lunch. They would really form two separate moral circles, defiling one another. So what should be done? And I would like your votes. You can be very superficial about it, for 3 possible options. Who says the boss needs to come? Raise your hands if you think this is for the boss. Because these 2 managers of the, I haven't told you that properly, I should. So the finance and personnel manager were actually in the 2 camps. And there was a general boss above them. Who says this is Chefsache? Boss should come. Nobody. Who says if we have better rules in the company about like how big the special order should be in order to interrupt the normal flow of affairs, then we don't need to fight over this. More rules. Yeah, I get some fingers here. Sorry? The last option. The last option is these 2 bosses, finance and personnel, are behaving like the cat and dog on the left, and they should behave like the cat and dog on the right. So we should send them to the moors and for them to spend the weekend there, and maybe with a coach, and then afterwards they'll be friends again, because this is ridiculous. Okay, so it's more in the atmosphere and the personal issue. I get a hand, but since nobody else raises your hand, you lower it again. But so I see that most of you, and I get a few more hands, instinctively tend to say better rules. Now the point of this is not what is the best option. The point of this is what happens if you ask this question of lots of students from different countries. And I'll come back to that in a few slides. So remember it. First, the takeaway about the moral circle: we are moral creatures. So we are very strongly, and this is what upbringing is all around. What is good for you to do? How should you behave? How should you not behave? If you're a boy, a girl of a certain class or caste or age, and so on and so forth. There are unwritten rules for all these things, and in some societies they are very strict, in others they're very loose. In some societies, if you keep to strict rules, that's when you're not doing the right things, and so on and so forth. So it's quite subtle. And this happens in these moral circles, real or imagined, and if they're imagined, we call them reference groups. And we have all these moral emotions. So if you know that you've been doing something that important people will value, you feel proud. If you have done something that important people will not value, you feel ashamed. You cannot help these feelings. If you have hurt somebody intentionally, you feel guilt, hopefully. There are, of course, other situations. If you hurt somebody and you don't want to feel guilty for some reason, you might blame them extra. They deserve it. They're really bad. So the emotions can go different ways. Okay, that brings us finally to culture. Here you see finally the real Hofstede. It's the guy without the hair on the top right. That's my dad. And Richard, if you're there, thank you for being here. My father would have loved to have you also in the same session. This is 10 years ago when he was still in good health, and he passed away in February 2020, just before the lockdown. And the third guy there, who is not me, that's Misha Minkov, the third author of our 2010 book on culture, which you may have learned, read, Cultures and Organizations. It exists in 20-odd languages. Many languages, you could find it in your own language. And here I made some world maps that I took from the site that I created. So since my dad died, I created this site with some gimmicks about culture, including these world maps that you can turn around. And if your country is not in there, then you can go to the site and find out. So you see that for each of these 6 dimensions of culture, there are very different world maps. Individualism is about, are human beings basically gas atoms floating freely into space? I can meet somebody, I can say hi, and I can meet somebody else, say hi, and you don't feel bad about it because this is how society is. We move around a lot, individualistic. Or do I need to know my place. I have a role. I'm the eldest son and my mother is still there. I have a responsibility and I need to visit her a few times a week to see to look after her in Twents erachterheen kijken. Dus this is the individualism, collectivism thing. In the second option, collectivist culture, loyalty is going to be a big emotion. Patriotism in those countries. You saw the values that these students thought that bosses from their country had. Second one, power distance. This is about, if I'm just an insignificant individual, do I actually accept that condition? Do I like to make myself small in the face of those who are above me? And it's not for nothing that this is also a religious symbol, done more in some cultures than others. It is associated with power distance of the culture. If I'm a child, I have a grandson of 2 years old, and he asked his mother this week, Mama, je mijn haar nippen? And then my daughter cut the hair of her little son. So he took the initiative. This is very unusual, a very egalitarian upbringing. So at a very young age, these things get settled. The third one, the red map, is about the balance between power and status. Do you stand up and fight in the red countries or sit down and talk in the pink countries? Gives a very different atmosphere to social life. The brown one, bottom left, is about anxiety in the face of things that you don't know, such as people with strange sexual mores or strange foods or unknown dangers or epidemics. How many rules and rituals do you need to fight those? Also, academic curiosity can be boosted in strongly uncertainty avoiding cultures because you really want to know. You do not tolerate not knowing. The fifth one, long-term orientation, it's about Do I live my status power life in the here and now? My hair has to be right, my clothes has to be right, I have to be nice to you when you're close to me. Or can I say, sorry, I have to go, I have to fetch my children from school and see you tomorrow. This is more long-term oriented, and you will understand that I have other duties. You will not resent me. Short-term versus long-term. The last one, the green one, is about, is life a good time? Are we having fun when we're alive, or is it a hard time and the weight of life is weighing us down? Indulgence also means that there is going to be more fun, but also more violence. And restraint means less fun, but also less obesity, more suicide, and indulgent, there's more manslaughter. So these are actually 6 big issues of social life, all of which a society has to resolve in order to not have to fight all the time about who gets the resources, who gets to be the boss or the father or the mother or gets the food. You need solutions to these. Actually, mammals have similar things. If you have a cat or a dog, certainly on the first 3 of the dimensions that are in the top, you will know that they have a culture too, and it differs between individuals and between races. That means that the status power game is played in different ways according to these 6 dimensions. So here you see that in jargon. Is the unit of worthiness of status, is that the individual or the group? If it's the group, you have to be loyal to that group, because if you do something wrong, it's not just you, it's the whole group. You put your group to shame. You don't want that. The second one, hierarchy. Are all people intrinsically equally worthy of status or not? In a large power distance culture, the answer is no. And typically that also involves a difference in default status between males and women, males and females, that is larger than in individualistic societies. Third one, it's about power versus status. Are we mainly basically from Mars or from Venus? The fourth one, and certainly avoidance, it's about, do we fear the power of unknown things? And of course, this is something that politicians can play on very much in uncertain times. If they can whip up uncertainty among their constituency, like you have to fight satanic powers. The fifth one is about short versus the long term. Do we, this thing is hurting me. Do we live for now or for the future? If we live for now, it also means that there's an idea about immutability of the world. And there might be strongly creationist stories around that collide with scientific insights. So the idea of change is not taken well. And finally, indulgence that I talked about already. But these are combined. There is a 6-dimensional space here, and so it's never so easy, even if you understand each of the 6 issues, which you probably won't at first, but even if you do that, you have to combine them. I'll try to do that with you a little bit. And this is also from my site. So if you go to this site here, you'll be able to make those graphs and choose your own continent or just pick countries on the globe of your interest. You have a map of the globe that you can click on to select countries. And here I gave you Europe. I think this is all Europe, yes. And here the 2 issues are on the horizontal axis, masculinity, femininity. So here we see feminine cultures, sit down and talk cultures, and this is stand up and fight cultures. On the vertical axis, it's power distance. So below it's egalitarian cultures. At the top, it's hierarchical cultures, where every relationship always involves a look for, okay, who's worth more status, and you want to indicate that. If I go as a professor to a hierarchical country and I get to the elevator, the sea will open for me and I can just proceed. Not so in the Netherlands. I mean, I will just be the last in line. So you see that in Denmark and Scandinavia and Baltics, a strategy to be worthy of status is to be nice to people. Being nice is good, also for politicians or everybody else, or parents, or teachers. I have a French colleague in Wageningen who tells me, Gert Jan, I don't understand it. Every time I tell the students to do something, they start to rouspéter. I have to ask them very gently, else they don't do it. And this is the Dutch situation. So, whereas in France, you can just order them around and they will do it. It's much more hierarchical. De Vlamingen onder u zullen het wellicht ook begrijpen. Then in the top, these are hierarchical feminine culture. So it's status is very important, but you're normally nice too. So Slovenia, Portugal are gentle countries, but quite hierarchical. On the right-hand side, it's more about muscle power. Schwarzenegger. If you're strong, that's good for you. Now these are 2 dimensions. Of course, there are 6. So let's look at another Hofstede. But first, I have a little story about you. And this is about, well, I didn't really show you, but the color here is the individualism. I didn't tell you about it. And you see that lighter pink means more collectivist. So it's more the crystal structure of society. Austria is rather more collectivist than many of the other European countries. And but most of Europe tends to be on the individualistic side.
Gert Jan, could I ask a question from the live stream?
Mm-hmm.
Already started.
Go ahead.
Well, in Europe, you can see all these differences on the different dimensions.
Yes.
But what's the explanation behind that? Because we're a continent that's not so big.
Do you have history teachers? We will need historians and deep historians too for this. So it's always connected to the ways in which our ancestors were able to cope with the conditions that they met. And they are path dependent, like in the paths model. But the details are often hidden in history. One thing that you can see is that, I think maybe 100,000 years ago or so, people had come out of Africa and gone into Asia, and then part of them went on east. They tend to be very collectivist. Also those that ended up in Colombia, Venezuela, very collectivist societies. Another part went back, India, Pakistan, Iran, Europe. They are more individualistic. So there is some kind of a very deep historical thing that happened. And it probably is strongly a founder effect. If you have a new society, a new group, just like with a new organization, you can have a strong shaping of the culture by the pioneers. And that has probably happened and is every now and then still happening. But once you have an existing group with many, many people, millions of people, they will all hold one another accountable in status power ways. So it's hard to change. One of the big problems of society now is that worldwide, anxiety is going up. I mean, everybody knows that some things are not going right, but nobody really wants to do something or knows what to do. Until we get our act together and really work together collectively on climate change, the anxiety will keep going up, I think. And it's not a good advisor. Okay, so let me go on. And I have a little story about you, about the difference between power distance and individualism. Here we have a boss calling an employee. This is the employee. Vieux con, old fool. And the question here is, can we make an inference about the culture in which this dog was brought up from this scene? And in particular about individualism and power distance. So if you have an idea about this dog is from an individualistic or collectivistic culture, large or small power distance, you can say so. Yes?
I think it's an
Individualistic dog. Why?
high power distance.
And high and large power distance. Well, of course, it's a French cartoon, Vieux con. It's actually Sempé. He recently died, a very, very good cartoonist. Is there anybody who says, I don't know, it could be collectivist or small power distance? This makes sense, right, what she's saying. So the dog obviously does not want to flatten itself. It takes 9 pictures to do so. So it has an individual resistance and a mind of its own, but it only talks to the back of the boss when he can't hear. And this is very French, and I think also in the south of the Netherlands and Flanders, there's a bit of that happening. So you see here these two dimensions, although correlated across countries, because most collectivistic countries are also larger power distance, are not the same thing. That's the message here. Then we go to the second two-dimension map. I have 3 of them for 6 dimensions. And here we see, and this is probably, if you're going to remember anything, remember this one. If you're into anything about business or public governance or social affairs, this is very important, because the shape of the moral circle changes along with especially these 2 dimensions here. So I have power distance horizontally with the egalitarian countries here. So now it's horizontal, not vertical. And the hierarchical countries here, and I have uncertainty avoidance vertically with small uncertainty avoidance in the bottom and large in the top. That means that Scandinavian countries, but also Anglo countries, work like markets, only they differ very much in masculinity. So in Denmark, it's more like a village market, and actually every village will have a potion and will have a little market in Denmark. In England, it's much more like a competitive market. It's a contest culture, really. And the USA and Australia and New Zealand are very similar in that respect. They're all Canada too, the cultural children of mainly the English, although Canada also has some Scandinavian influence. At the top, you see machine cultures. A market is easy to change. You just go there, if you have something good on sale, people will buy it and you're in business. A machine is not so easy to change. So in Germany, it's wenn schon, denn schon. You only begin after everybody agrees, after careful planning, and then you really do it. The Netherlands is in between. So our soul is often torn between the Anglo and the Rijnlandse model. So do we need expertise or do we need generalists? On the right-hand side, the top, societies are like a pyramid. You have to know your place, and if your place is lower than somebody else, then you only do what those above you tell you to, and it's not safe to do anything what anybody else tells you. It's very safe to do anything else. So they cannot change so easily. So change in a pyramid is changes are going to be few and far between. Here it's also hierarchical on the bottom right, but much more flexible. So if I am a junior manager somewhere, I have a lot of leeway as long as I don't insult the boss. Jack Ma could make Alipay very, very big until he started to say things about the leadership of the party. And then he actually had to go into exile for a few months. So you see, these are powerful metaphors. And actually one of them is market. And that reminds us maybe of this Operation Market Garden. Since the Second World War, the market metaphor of organizing world affairs has dominated. Because France and Germany and their models, their pyramid and machine models, were out. And the family model that dominated much of Asia and Africa, these were very poor countries at the time. So all the textbooks that you read in international business are probably about the market, implicitly about the market model of organizing the moral circle. Those days are over. China family model is overtaking the USA as the most powerful country, and you can see it. And it's a good thing that Xi Jinping and Joe Biden spend some time together. And I really hope that Donald Trump doesn't come back into power and do more damage. He's like the elephant in the porcelain cupboard. So we'll have to actually, with our market, implicitly market-shaped institutions, accommodate those other metaphors. I'll come back to that after 5. One point that's important: how does change happen? In only one of these 4 is change easy. In a market, you withdraw your business or you join the market. In all the others, change is more difficult. In a family, you need marriage rituals and that kind of thing. So there's going to be a lot more ritual, like having a meal together. It's actually always a good idea. If you meet somebody new and you want to build up a relationship, have a meal or a drink. Pyramid and family, it's even more like a crystal, and you need even more work to enter there. Okay, now back to Katz and Hund. So if you ask this question to people from these culture quadrants, then those who are from the pyramid or family quadrants tend to say, mais il faut le patron. Où il est le patron, de toute façon? You need the boss needs to step in. So that's most of the world. Where has the boss been anyway? Without an absenteeist boss, subordinates cannot start to fight anyway. People from the machine quadrant, like Germany, maybe Japan, they would say, let's make better rules. So then we don't need to fight, we just consult the rules and we do what the rules say. So this works only in a culture where people actually keep to the rules. In cultures that are strongly uncertainty avoiding, but not in the machine quadrant, so they're more hierarchical, typically people don't keep to the rules. They make rules, but they make rules for a ritual purpose, not to keep them. The Germans, they will keep to the rules, typically. And finally, from a market quadrant, like you ask this of Brits, they're likely to say, oh, these cats and hounds should stop behaving like children. And, you know, they should focus on the aim of the company and the common good. So you see that although it's an honest question to everybody, and if it happens in your company, you just have to find something. If you look at thousands of cases, you see the influence of culture. And this is a bit the problem with culture. You don't see its influence in single cases. Well, you might think about it like the boss and the dog, but you see it when you compare across many cases. And this is what life experience can do for you, and why an international student time is so good, because it will allow you to make better assessments of how to be status worthy in different circumstances, especially if you're meeting other people in meetings who are nervous, who are afraid of doing the wrong thing, and you can pacify them, even if they're your enemies. That will do you such a lot of good, because somebody who is nervous and anxious will not make pleasant decisions. So being able to take the nervousness and the anxiety away from meetings is always a very good plan for each of you. Okay, finally, the last two dimensions, they did not come from the first study that my dad did in the 60s and 70s. They came from other studies by Michael Bonds in Asia and Michael Minkov on World Value Survey data. You can see all of that in this Gert Hofstede site if you're interested. These dimensions give a very different picture, and here I put, I think, the 50 most populous countries in the world plus a few others in the picture. So I made a different selection. You can see here on the horizontal axis, do we live for today and the past, or do we live for the future? On the vertical axis, you can see, are we indulgent? Is life good, top, or is it hard, bottom? And you see, if life is hard and we live for today, then actually it's very easy to do the wrong thing, and sin lurks. And Egypt is also hierarchical and masculine. So you have Sharm el-Sheikh now, the summit. You can expect strong repression of anything that reeks of sin there. Pakistan too, many refugees. It's a difficult life, and now of course it's more difficult with the huge floods that they've had. On the right hand side, life is hard, but it goes on. We have to be prepared for our fate. On the right hand side of the picture, there's going to be more schooling. People learn and study because they want to improve themselves. On the left hand side, they're already good. Why should I study? It doesn't mean that nobody studies. I once did a lecture in Jeddah in Saudi Arabia, and there was this Egyptian boy who came to me in the break, and he says, can I ask you a question? Do you believe in evolution? Yes, I said. Me too. So it was a big secret that he was confiding because he thought I was worthy of receiving this confidence. I think he did well later. I have seen his appearance on social media. In the top, these are indulgent cultures. Life is good. You want to have good parties, gay, happy music, go to the top countries. In the left-hand side, it's both enjoy the life, but also enjoy catching the bad guys. USA, Mexico, lots of crime and lots of crime fighting. Lots of news about that. News about every day and the crimes every day. In the Netherlands and Switzerland, Austria, it's more there is lots of fun, but also the future. So we have so much fun that children become overworked with it, and they have too many nice things to do, and it is all also a duty, because individualistic, so have to work on your own reference groups and build them up. Right, that brings me to the takeaway of culture. So it shapes our moral circles. We all have these moral circles, status, power, logic, and reference groups, but they're different in different cultures. We learn our culture in childhood. If you have small cousins or nephews, you are also a reference group to them. You teach them many things just by who you are. And by neglecting them, you teach them something different than by visiting them often. How to be worthy of status, how to claim status, and how to give, to confer status. How to use power, when to use it, how much of it. Doesn't matter whether you're a boy or a girl, it matters a great deal for small babies. So it's about the big issues of social life, and they're rooted in our sociality. And these big issues are these 6 dimensions. Actually, I'm searching for the place that is on the picture here, and it's Stonehenge. Stonehenge was obviously built for status reasons, not power reasons. I mean, you cannot defend yourself against enemies in such a thing. They found bones of pigs around Stonehenge, some of which had genetic markers of Orkney. In Orkney, 3000 before Jesus Christ, there was also a similar civilization. They built similar monuments, and so people from all around these, what's now the British Isles, and maybe also what's the Northwest Europe, they would congregate in the summer and have a large feast, including a lot of pork meat. So this is also a symbol of our sociality and status, power, life in reference groups. Okay, so that brings us to almost drinks, but I think there will be questions, and let me first try to throw you the mic. Yeah, hey. Carl, I believe.
Yeah, thank you. Oh, it's a little bit loud. Thank you for your presentation so far. In the beginning, you had a very impressive picture of the KZ in Germany, which brings me actually to my question. So, in Germany, we had, till 1945, we had a nationalist system with very low individualism and, for example, a high hierarchy. After that, until the Mauerfall in 1990, we had on the Western German front more individualism, and on the Eastern front more collectivism. So how fast can like a society change regarding the 6 categories you have shown before?
Let me make a metaphor about climate. Every year is different, and I remember 10 years ago we had 3 cold winters, for instance. It doesn't mean that the climate hasn't been heating up all the time. So at different levels, you can make different inferences about change. I do not think that the culture of the various German regions has changed so much in that period. There is still the Weißwurstlinie, and south of it, people are more masculine, collectivistic, and uncertainty avoiding than north of it. There is still the fact that in East Germany, it's a bit more collectivistic, and in the Northwest, it's more, let's say, Scandinavia-like. So you've had that throughout that period, and people also migrate for a reason. They like it somewhere, or they don't like it somewhere else. So that's the backdrop. But it's also the case that after the First World War, the Germans were humiliated to such an extent that there was a pretty wide feeling of resentment, which was a fertile environment for somebody with an anxiety-based ideology, Hitler, to come to the top. And then the fact that Ordnung muss sein, and you have to do what you have to do, you have to follow the system, actually led to, among others, Birkenau. It was close to Krakow in Poland. If you consult historians, you can often understand a sort of status power theory of relations, understanding of changes in society, that doesn't require you to assume that culture has changed for good. And there is very often, I think, a conflation between political events and culture in the minds of people when explaining change. For instance, after the demise of the of the Soviet Union in 1990, for a long while, everything in Eastern Germany was blamed on that. That seems to be forgotten now. So you have to look deep enough into the past to start to see continuity in culture. But of course, whether cultures are changing is really, really hard to establish. There is, if you like, there is a professor from Groningen, Sjoerd Beugelsdijk, and if you look at his publications, he's been writing about cultural changes in the last century based on questionnaire answers of different cohorts of age of people. That's very interesting. And you see slow shifts. Okay, more questions? Yeah, can you throw the ball here?
Don't worry.
Yeah. I will assist you. Yeah. Oh. Yeah.
So I was wondering, does digitalization and social media also influence the culture dimensions? Because worldwide,
if you build a grass of rubber or plastic instead of having a biological grass, and you play football or hockey, it doesn't change the rules of the game, but it may change the outcome because some people are better at playing in these circumstances. And this is also the case with social media. So if you are good at claiming status, maybe in a slightly false way, which is really power use, then you can do that on social media, and for a while you can thrive. You pay the price one day, probably. So it doesn't change the unwritten rules of the social game, but it changes the possibilities to do certain actions, the social media.
thank you.
Okay. Oops, sorry, yeah. I'm afraid of throwing too far and then I throw too near. Sorry.
Don't worry. So from the maps and the graphs, I've seen that there's a lot of countries with similar economies and religions. Not in most, in all the
economies
cases.
are not shown in the
No,
map.
yeah, but I mean just the countries that has similar economies and religions between them. Not in all of the cases, but in most of them, that they were close by or together. To which extent do you think that religion and economy shapes a culture, and do you think that we can change a culture by changing these parameters?
To which extent do you think that religion and economy shape the culture? That's what you're saying.
Yeah.
I think it's mainly the other way around. So if you have a certain culture, you're more likely as a society to adopt a certain religion and to do well or less well under a certain economic tide, which has been very much a market tide internationally recently. But it is also the case that when countries become more wealthy, you can see individualism going up a bit. It makes sense. People are more able to care for themselves, and it's easier for them to disregard a fixed position in which they are.
So actually, culture shapes religion and economies.
Yes. Now, religions have, of course, occurred in many places in the world, especially there was this onset of monotheistic religions starting about 3,000 years ago and to about 1,000 years ago. And they are a very good way for a people to resolve leadership crises. If you have a God that's always there, wherever you are, the God will travel with you. And if the king or the queen dies, the God is still there. This is a very good way to maintain the life of a population. So when a religious concept is able to reproduce itself, it has a tendency to stay. It could also be very beneficial in other ways. If you have a religion that preaches, let's say, behaviors that are very good for the survival of the group, which is typically what it does. It's about solidarity and loyalty and things like that. That also, of course, improves the survival of that group. But you see interesting dynamic in different cultures adhering to the same religion that isn't really the same thing. Catholicism in Latin America has been a freedom religion, not so in Europe. So I could give more examples. So essentially, religion is a set of practices that aims to build a moral circle. It has strong moral rules, and in many religions, in more hierarchical societies, you are not allowed to leave. In others, you are. So religion is all about moral rules, and they are strongly shaped by culture, but in ways that most people do not appreciate. Also, if you think that culture is a personality thing, you will never understand it. It's a colony thing. It's not an ant thing.
Thank you.
Sorry, Gert, I don't want to spoil the fun, but I think due to time reasons...
Yeah, we need to stop.
Have a small break and then we'll start with the
Yes.
part.
Okay, so the last part will be me briefly bombarding you with a flowchart about how to get along with others, and then Dinant and Ferdi bombarding me and you with some other stuff. And try to be on time, because there's also a small communication from the International Students Club, I think. Right? We have somebody? But anyway, it's coffee time now.